Hi there, Malcolm here with my 134th Booktube video, and today I'll be bringing you my September wrap-up and October TBR. Two great big piles to get through, so let's get cracking. First up, I've read a lot of Astrix books. I've read quite a lot of these, so I just want to whiz through these quite quickly when they pop up, just to save a bit of time. So the first one's Astrix and the Great Crossing. They go fishing, the storm hits, and they end up in North America, and so they're now facing off against the Native Americans and just wondering where they are. And with an interesting twist, they're sort of rescued by the Vikings, who have just discovered North America and are then brought back across the pond. An enjoyable story. I would say perhaps the depiction of the Native Americans is pretty stereotypical at this point, although the fact that it's set at 50 BC, one could argue is perhaps a more accurate representation, but I'll leave that up to others to discuss. Booktastic. After I then read Obelix and Co., where the Romans have a new cunning ploy to try and break up the indomitable Gaulish village by throwing lots of money at them and hoping that greed and the pursuit of wealth will overcome their normal unconquerable disposition. Really clever ideas in here, and a nice breakdown of just how economy works as well. Booktastic. And then I read Astrix in Belgium, where Astrix and his friend Obelix set upon a bunch of Romans who are very pleased to be beaten up by some Gauls for a nice refreshing change from being beaten up by the beastly Belgians. The Gauls don't take it too well to hear that they are the easier of the two options, and so travel to Belgium to just find out what it is about the Belgians that make them so great and fearful. And so the two sides have a competition on who could beat up the most Romans in a time given, and see if Julius Caesar himself can officiate the contest. Very silly, but lots of fun. Booktastic. And then after that is Astrix and the Great Divide, the first book that Albert Uderzo, the illustrator, wrote as well, due to the death of his compatriot René Goscinny. And the fact that this is one of my favourite from the series is a testament to Uderzo's dedication to keeping Astrix feeling like Astrix, even without its illustrious writer. And in this one, Astrix is brought in to help out at another village which has a literal split down the middle, with one chief controlling one side and one chief controlling the other side. And the feud is so great that one of the sides is going to bring in the Romans into the mix, which isn't going to work out for the village at all. And there's a Romeo-Juliet type style love affair between the offspring of the two chiefs, and the notable character of Codfix, who is very reminiscent of Grimmer Wormtongue from the Lord of the Rings series. Brilliant stuff, booktastic. And after that, I finished reading Flood by Stephen Baxter. I started this in August, but just ran out of month, and so I got to finish it in September. Really glad I pushed on with it. Absolutely brilliant, really readable. The constant pace of the rising water added a good level of tension to the story. So the story follows a bunch of hostages who are rescued from captivity, and they find that the world outside is quite wet. It's raining non-stop, pretty much globally. And so they're trying to put their lives back together again from what they've missed for the last few years of captivity. But the world is not focused on them at all, really. It's too much worried about the fact that the sea levels are rising at an alarming rate. It's soon discovered it's not just the fact that it's global warming, that's not helping, but there is another aspect going on as well. Attributed to man's actions, certainly, but not just global warming. I'm not saying, ignore global warming, but it's saying there's more to it than this, due to the sheer level of water rising here, where it doesn't rise tens of metres, but thousands of metres in the course of the book. So it follows the economical and humanitarian crisis as there's less and less land and people trying to survive in this situation. So the focus is on these ex-hostages as they interact with each other and find themselves in situations where they may or may not benefit from their position towards this flood, and just what mankind tries to do in an increasingly bleak world. The message of looking after our planet is quite clear in here. It doesn't hit you over the head with it. There's a few mentions that it is the actions of mankind that has caused this, but it doesn't get preachy at all, which is this is why it's happening, but now we've just got trying to survive. And a nice little touch is for each segment of the book is a map of Earth showing what the land masses look like at the sea level at whatever height it is at the time. And it's quite shocking what disappears so quickly and what hangs around for the longest. It's really interesting stuff. Absolutely loved it. Very impressed with this one. Buy it. And then I read Dune by Frank Herbert to my wife. With the film coming out soon, I was quite keen on rereading the book that I read when I was 14, and my wife was quite keen on reading it because she'd never read it before. Kill two birds with one stone by me reading it to her. And for those who don't know, Dune is a science fiction book set in the far-off distant future. Mankind has reached the stars and has settled other planets. And there's one planet in particular that has a lot of interest, Arrakis. It is a desert world which has one major export, spice, which is extremely addictive, but also has lots of medicinal properties as well, which is hugely beneficial to everybody who eats it. And we follow House Atreides as the Duke is assigned this planet to look over by the Emperor in a very obvious set-up to fail situation, because its previous owners, the House Harkonnen, are clearly not going to let it go without a fight. And this is how we come into the story. We mostly follow the Duke's son, Paul, as he and his mother survive the coup and find themselves surviving in the desert and living with the desert inhabitants, the Fremen. It's more of a family saga in a lot of ways. It's a political book. It sees the birth of a religion. It has giant worms in it. And for a book that was first published in 1966, we were both absolutely surprised with just how forward-thinking it is. This book is still relevant today, and the portrayal of female characters surpasses what we see in a lot of books that are published these days. Certainly surpasses what was published back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And this really impressed us. I had very little memory of reading this the first time round, and perhaps 14 was a little young to have read it. Because although it is easy to read, it's not necessarily an easy read. It has quite a lot of large concepts in here, and one could argue it does get bogged down a little with the local lingo and this religion that's building up. But I can certainly see why this is a popular book, why it was made into a very successful board game, and hopefully it's been made into a really good film. And even comes with a glossary of terms at the back, so if you don't know what they're talking about, there's a nice dictionary there as well. Booktastic. And then I read Astrix and the Black Gold, where our heroes travel to Egypt in order to acquire petroleum and the central ingredient of the magic potion, and they're accompanied by a druidish spy from the Roman Empire, 006, whose likeness is very similar to Sean Connery's, and the highlight being when they're wandering around in the desert and they keep being attacked by various different tribes, all trying to fight each other and mistaking them for the Hittites and all the rest of it. Very amusing. Booktastic. And then I read The Stranger Times by C.K. Mcdonald. This was my book of the month, and the 8th book I finished in it. I've done an individual video on this one, so if you want to know what I thought of that, I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below. And then after that, I then read Outcast, Book 3, This Little Light by Robert Kirkman. I read books 1 and 2 a couple of months ago and was really impressed with this demon exorcism style story, although it's not just straight up demons, there's something else going on as well. But some really clever concepts in here. And although the story is quite slow moving, the characters are so intriguing and the overwhelming threat hanging over everything is so palpable. It's really engaging. The artwork is sombre and really fits the story nicely. Buy it. And after that I then read Astrix and Son, where Astrix finds a baby in a basket on his doorstep. Cue a running joke about storks and various Romans disguising themselves as peddlers or nursemaids to try and steal this baby away from Astrix. Attempts that are thwarted by the baby himself, who, through various means, has drunk some magic potion and is a little bit more of a handful than expected. Really clever stuff, very funny, and a surprising, if pretty far-fetched twist at the end. Booktastic. And after that I then read The Honour of the Queen, Book 2 of the Honor Harrington series by David Webber. Basically billed as the Star Warsiest thing you can read without it being actually Star Wars. This is a space opera following Commander Honor Harrington as she goes on another adventure against all the odds, being a woman in a man's world sort of thing. And in this case it's literally the area they go to is extremely misogynistic and women can't hold any important jobs or roles or anything, and they're at war with their nearest neighbours of equal knobheads, and she's sent in as the lead to mediate the two factions, and of course no one's going to listen to her because she's a woman. And of course going into this it was quite interesting in that this story is very relevant to what's going on today with the Me Too movement and other drives to do crazy things like having women get equal pay to men. But of course what really stood out for me here was the fact that this book was written by a man. And of course it doesn't matter how well researched a topic is or how closely you've talked to, in this case, women. I'm always filled with a little bit of scepticism as to the authenticity of our female characters' reactions to the situation. particularly pertaining to a story like this one. And of course, having read it as a man, I didn't find anything wrong with it. So he's either done a good job, or I'm the wrong gender to have noticed that he didn't do a good job. Now, having read book one, I kind of know what sort of story he likes to go for, where Honor Harrington really does play the underdog, insurmountable odds, and, you know, she's going to come out on top in the end at some point. The series is based on her, and there are, I don't know, something in the region of 20 books of the series, so she's not going to get bumped off of that soon in the series, or at all. And so the inevitability of her success was never in doubt. But it's the journey, and certainly I really enjoyed the book one on Basilisk Station, and for the same reasons I enjoyed this one. When she wins, it's a feel-good thing, and the build-up to her winning, you just know that the jerks in charge are going to get it in some capacity. I would have also liked about this is, yes, it was a society of misogynistic arseholes, but not everybody was the same. Some were more open to alternative ways of thinking, and others were very much steadfast, no, this is the way we're doing things. But even the more open people that we encountered still had their inbuilt prejudices, which, despite the fact that they did their best to overcome, were kind of horrified when they still emerged, whether it's an unwanted feeling or inappropriate response to a situation. You know in your head how to behave and how you ought to be towards this woman, to treat her as an equal. But through your upbringing, through the doctrine of your society, you still find yourself behaving in a particular way. So this was published in '93. Not an awful lot's changed since then in the world, to be honest. So still extremely relevant. I think he did a good job dealing with the situation, but then I'm not necessarily the best person to call it on that. But I did enjoy the story an awful lot, which is just as well because I have picked up quite a few books of the series in anticipation of reading them, and to have hated it at this point would have been a bit of a disappointment, and there'd be a massive unhaul, which would have been a good thing in a way, but buy it. So those are the books I have read in September, and now the books I am planning to read in October. Bearing in mind I'm filming this on the 18th, but never mind. So first up is the Book of the Month, Bullet Train by Kotaro Isaka. Apologies if I pronounced that wrong. Translated into English by Sam Melissa. This is a book gifted at the same time as The Stranger Times by the same person, and a book I wouldn't have looked at twice on the shelf in a bookshop or library. Which is why giving books to people is a good thing, because it gives them the opportunity to read books they would never have thought about reading. So Bullet Train is a train leaving Tokyo to far off distant parts of Japan very, very quickly. But it's not so much the train, but the people on it, or rather the collection of hitmen, assassins, and general bad guys who are on this train all at the same time for different or similar reasons. And in this thriller, we're going to see who actually gets to the final destination, if any. So kind of intrigued. Not usually my sort of thing, but we'll give it a go. And after that, I'll then read Piercing the Darkness by Frank Peretti, book 2 of the Darkness duology. Supposed to have read this last month, didn't get around to it, so plugging my way through it this month. I started a couple of days ago, having just finished Bullet Train, so halfway through the month, 500 plus page book. Going well so far. Heaven versus Hell, fighting over a town and the lives of those people within. Book 1 was wrapped up quite nicely, so not quite sure where book 2 is going to go with it, but I'll find out. Well, I'm in the process of finding out. 60 pages in, still not sure, to be honest. When I finish this, I'll then move on to Mammoth Book of Best New Sci-Fi 18. Another tiny book at 722 pages. Finishing this in this month will be highly unlikely, but I'm going to give it my best shot. That massive collection of short stories by various different sci-fi authors. Hopefully lots of good stuff in here. And after I read that, it's Star Wars time. I'm currently going through all my Star Wars books chronologically. I've got about 400 of them now, possibly more. I'm about halfway through them. But of course, having got to a certain point, I have subsequently picked up other books that were early in the chronology that I either didn't have or weren't published at the time. So I recently picked up Maul, Lockdown by Joe Scriber. So it's a book with Maul in it. And Joe Scriber has written 2 other Star Wars books I've read, Red Harvest and Death Troopers. Lots of zombies, very gruesome, quite horror-led, thrilling adventures. So really looking forward to seeing what he does with Darth Maul, possibly in a prison. Don't know much about that one, but looking forward to giving that a go. And after I've read that, I'll then move on to the Carillon Trilogy by Roger Mcbride Allen, set a little while after the end of Return of the Jedi. So Ambush at Carillon, Assault at Salonia, and Showdown at Centerpoint. Don't know much about this story, but I do know that the main alien in it are some sort of otter men type people. Severely doubt I'll get through any of these this month, but they're next up on the TBR for when I get there. I'm also reading graphic novels in and amongst all that. Still working my way through the Astrix books. This is the last lot that I've got. So Astrix and Magic Carpet, Astrix and Secret Weapon, Astrix and Obelix All at Sea, and this is the last one chronologically I have. And so then I have to skip a few to Astrix and the Falling Sky, Astrix and the Pects, which is Astrix and the Picts, but in Scots. We were in Scotland at the time. I think actually visiting Culloden or somewhere like that, and we spotted this one. I thought, oh, that'll be a bit of fun. So relatively readable, but I think a lot of the in-jokes I'll miss because of the translation. Astrix and the Missing Scroll, I've never actually read. How Obelix fell into a potion when he was a baby, something that is alluded to several times through the series. We actually find out how it happened. And then 2 books of the films, The 12 Tasks of Astrix and Astrix versus Caesar, which I haven't even seen. I also read to everyone else in the household, so to my boys when they're both together and got time for, I'm reading The Light Fantastic by Terry Pratchett, book 2 of the Discworld series. To my oldest, when he's home, I'm reading Lion Adventure by Willard Price. To my youngest, I'm reading The Curse of the Gloam Gloser, book 1 of the Edge Chronicles by Paul Stewart, illustrated by Chris Riddle. Chronologically, it's the first book. I think it's like the 4th one written, but chronologically it's first. And to my wife, I'm now reading Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert, having finished Dune. So the next story in the series. We're about halfway through it, and I can say that we are quite disappointed with it so far. Hopefully it'll pick up. Really hoping. And there we have it. If you'd like to share your TBRs, wrap-ups, or any other thoughts on the books I've shown you, or similar to the books I've shown you, then please comment down below. As usual, if you have nothing nice to say, then please do keep it to yourself. Thank you, and until next time, see you later.